First speaker, and he's the man who gave me my assignment. You will recognize I'm an historian, not a student of politics immediately. And if I were to talk about politics, it would be about the 1880s, not the 2010s. But I don't think you're eager to know about the election of 1887 tonight. So I'm going to be speaking more as a citizen than as an historian. I welcome this initiative, first off, because I do think it's important that we talk sensibly and reasonably about politics. I think this is an important election, as all elections are. And I agree that there are myths out there about parties and policies that are worth talking about. Not that I think that you're subject to these myths or that I know something about them. I think you'll know more about some of these than I do, and that we can talk about them in a minute. First, I'm going to tell you three stories. One's a myth that deals with the NDP, one's a myth that deals with the Tories, and the third is a myth, I think, about one key issue in the coming election of 2011. So first, in popular understanding, it seems to me absolutely clear that people believe in general that the NDP couldn't run a popcorn stand, in Sterling Lyon's famous phrase, that they make lousy financial managers. Well, I actually grew up with someone who ran a popcorn stand, a socialist in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. He ran it very well. His daughter was in my class. She came to university with me. And so I've got a strong view about popcorn stands and their success in the economy. And I have a comparable view about the NDP. In the same period that that popcorn stand was running in Prince Albert, Tommy Douglas was the Premier of Saskatchewan. And in that administration, running from 1944 through that of Woodrow Lloyd in 1964, 20 years, they ran 19 balanced budgets, and one that was just slightly, because of a mistake, out of whack by just a few $1,000s. And so this myth of the socialists who can't run popcorn stands, I find a little off-putting as a Saskatchewan citizen. So I come to Manitoba, and I discover in the 1981 election, Sterling Lyon making the same kind of arguments, and then observe in the next 5 years the NDP spending in deficit, no question about it, as Keynesian counter-cyclical politicians should. And then I notice something that seems to have dropped off the map of everyone's observations, that in 1987 and 1988, Eugene Costera turned that deficit right around, literally changed that deficit circumstance. And the Tories who followed, from 1988 to 1999, lived on Costera's 1987 and 88 budgets. They put a little more money into his fiscal stabilization fund, but the myth that the NDP in Manitoba couldn't run a popcorn stand, I just find unconvincing, because I watched that financing and can declare, hey, this was the change that mattered. Seems to have dropped off people's understanding of Manitoba politics. So that's one. The second, I lived here through the 1981 to 84 French language crisis. And I think that ever since, the Tories have suffered from the label that they are anti-French. And that the loss of Southwest Winnipeg has been in part attributable to the fact that Sterling Lyon fought so bitterly in 1982-3-4 those measures of the Poly government for French language services. And yet, when you look at the Filman government's record on French language services in the early 1990s, admittedly with the help of several court rulings, what the Filman government did was provide, first of all, French language service centers that have served the province well ever since. And the Division Scolaire Franco-Manitobaine, the French language schools district system, that in fact is a superb way of organizing French language education in this province. And so to argue that the Tories retain that Lyon stigma, I think is unfair. And so there's my gesture to non-partisan, or at least balanced partisan, the dismissal of two myths. One, that the NDP can't manage finances. Two, that the Tories are anti-French. My third illustration has to do with an issue you've all read about and I've read about, but I know nothing inside about this. I never talked to Gary Dewar, I never talked to Bob Brennan and all these people who made these decisions, but bipole 3 transmission line, the route, has to be an issue in this election because there are so many hundreds of millions of dollars lying on that decision. Now, when I was a kid, my parents read me a story that maybe your parents read to you too, about the longest, shortest way home and the longest way around. You know that story about little boys trying to get home and which is the longest way around and the shortest way home? And about 2 years later I got to school, and the first thing I discovered was that the shortest line was this distance between 2 points, and that was a straight line. So here's which of those is the myth? The idea of the longest way around is the shortest way home, or the straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points. We listen to the arguments that have been made in favor of the east side transmission line. They're basically based on a map. And they say, well, gosh, it's a lot shorter and therefore a lot cheaper. What's the argument on the other side? I think we've heard less about it. But my reply would be, think about the cultures on the east side of Lake Winnipeg. Think about the 13 Aboriginal chiefs representative of those cultures and their perspective on the decision they have to make. Think about the people who buy the power in the northern United States in particular at the moment, and their decisions about clean versus dirty power. Think about the people on the west side of Lake Manitoba and their perspective on a timeline and the cost of, for example, selling a certain chunk of their land in order to put the transmission poles in. And then say to yourself, well, which is the shortest route? Which is the one that will last the longest? Now, I don't have an answer to it, but it just seems to me that one of those two is a myth. Either the shortest way home isn't the longest way around, or the straight line isn't that distance between 2 points. When I teach, I don't know which one's the myth. When I teach, what I find when the kids come in the first day of class in September, not many of them have ever voted. Not many of them profess an interest in politics, and most of them would say they don't know much about either politics or parties. That is a consistent thread. And so, one of the last things I'd like to say is this. Reasonable discussion of policy and personality can stimulate the interest of anyone, win the participation of anyone in electoral politics. These are the only weapons we have in a democracy to preserve reason and to ensure that might doesn't make right. And that isn't a myth. Thanks.